Lovely to see everybody here. My name is Karishma. For those of you who don't know me, I'm head of training and behavior at Canine Academy. We're training partners with Muddy Paws Rescue, so I see a lot of cases from Muddy Paws and work with some of the dogs in their foster system. As part of our partnership, we're doing this educational series for everyone who's part of the Muddy Paws community. This will be recorded, just so everybody knows, and we will be making this recording available to other Muddy Paws fosters and adoptees over the next few months. I'm just going to double check no one else is in the waiting room. Perfect, excellent. Okay, so my name is Karishma, like I said, and I'm going to talk to you guys today. It's the first of a 4-part series. We're basically looking to support the Muddy Paws community as much as we can, spread the expertise that we have developed over spending the last sort of 4 years or so working with rescue dogs in New York City. My personal experience, I've been working, as I said, for over 4 years. I worked at multiple sort of pretty big locations in Manhattan, working as a dog trainer before starting my own company, which is Canine Academy. And I've worked with some of you guys. I see some familiar faces hanging out and some familiar dog faces in the background. I see you, Chico. So I've been working a lot with the community, with the dogs, both in foster and after being adopted. The point of these series is we want to be able to spread this information that I've been spreading over and over again for the last 4 years. There are a lot of patterns. Let me just turn this sound off very quickly. There are a lot of patterns that we see, and I want to make sure that we are giving everybody the information that they need. So this is intended as both an informational series for adoptees, people who have just adopted dogs, or for fosters, as well as just the rescue community. And we do this with every rescue that we're partnered with. I've just got one more person in the waiting room. Let me make sure I'm letting everybody in. Good, nice. I think that's everybody in now. I'm going to keep an eye on the wait room, but I'm going to crack on. So a little bit about me. I have a master's in philosophy specializing in animal ethics. I went on to get multiple training accreditations. For those of you who don't know, dog training is a very unregulated industry, particularly in America. So it's very difficult to know who is and isn't qualified to give certain pieces of information. I can give you guys more information about my academic background, but on top of that, I have been working specifically in New York for 4 years and specifically with rescues. So I see a lot of patterns of dogs coming in, as do lots of people, lots of my colleagues. And I've sat down with a few of our other trainers, and we've come up with this comprehensive series that's meant to take you through kind of all the different steps that you might, all sorts of different things that you might need to know to successfully either foster or adopt in an urban environment specific to the urban environment, right? So the first series is called Set Up. The first class is called Set Up for Success. It's all about management, enrichment, how we can help our dogs feel good and not like low stress in these very difficult times. The second is going to be separation and isolation specifically because it's such a difficult issue for so many dogs in the foster system and recent adoptees. Our third sort of section in a few weeks is going to be, well, third and fourth is going to be fear and aggression and reactivity. So this is really a foundational sort of webinar today, giving you guys all the basic information that you need to be knowing when bringing and caring for dogs. Let me just turn off my, there you go. Okay, I'm going to share my screen for you guys, and I'm going to take you through a little PowerPoint that we have for you guys. So let me just start this up. Yay, very excited. I'm really excited to go through this with you guys because this has kind of been a lot of work has culminated into this kind of this thing. I've been working with myself and other trainers, and we're really excited to get it to you. So let's go straight in to this kind of stuff. All right, so I'm going to stick here for a second. The first thing I want to talk about is what we're looking at when we have dogs coming in to the foster system or into the after being adopted. These dogs have just had a bit of an experience, right? Most of them coming through, particularly Muddy Paws, they're coming from the south, they're coming from kill shelters and from places that probably they did not have their basic needs met. So what that basically means is we're looking at usually 2 different types of reactions to the stress that they've experienced. One thing to bear in mind is that when we're thinking about the stress that these dogs have experienced, we're not just thinking about a few weeks of stress. Some of these dogs have been in stress states for years. You know, lots of these dogs that we see coming from through our rescues like Muddy Paws have had, you know, we know that they've had abusive, neglectful situations in the past. So we're dealing with a very specific subsection or cross-section of the canine sort of population here, often ones that we know are coming to us at a sort of emotional disadvantage. And there are 2 big ways that I see this stress we see this stress manifest. One is in hyperactivity and the other one is in shut down behaviors. So I want to talk about hyperactivity first. So hyperarousal, right, often manifests as all of these things: nipping, jumping, pacing, barking, attention-seeking behaviors, destructive behaviors, whining, frequent urination, low frustration, anxiety about resources, reactivity, hypervigilance, panting, and body tension. There are more. And these are just the core, it's just the core symptoms, the core things. And this little PDF here shows you guys some of the sort of physiological features of a hyperactive dog. And these are dogs that we often come in the rescue system that are labeled as stubborn, hyper, they're labeled as being disruptive, as being destructive. And in many cases, what I'm actually seeing with all of these things is a lot of stress built up in a body over a long period of time and coming out as they sort of start to decompress from the situation that they were in prior to being put in foster or an adoptive home. I think that dogs that there are also certain like categories of dogs, so meaning like developmental stages of dogs, or dogs during certain developmental stages that are more likely to express stuff like this. And we're talking about puppies, so dogs under 6 months old, and then adolescents, so anywhere between 6 months and 3 years old. In general, there's lots of information out there about how difficult puppyhood and adolescence is, and then that's without the kind of excessive stress and kind of traumatic experiences that we have with dogs that are coming in through rescue system. So we're really looking at this kind of perfect storm where we have adolescent dogs, young dogs coming into an urban environment and coming out of extreme stress states where they've been in really, really high pressure situations for really, really long amounts of time. So when we see this coupled with a lack of early training and a lack of early socialization, we get a kind of monster version of this, which is often sorry, 1 second. So for those of you who haven't seen already, let me show you who we have here. We have the picture of hyperarousal. This is Kobe, for those of you who can see on my little screen. Kobe was a Muddy Paws rescue that came to me to do a board and train a few months ago. He now is very happy in his home with his parents. But he expressed loads and loads of these behaviors when he first came to me. He was constantly pacing back and forwards, pretty much constantly whining, needed to urinate every 60 minutes or more and couldn't hold it. He would just go. He was very reactive to everything, resource guards, between other people and other dogs, and was very nippy and jumping and attention seeking in general. As you can see, he's gotten a lot better. He's now happily in his home. He's just with me for a weekend. But at the beginning, it was pretty much constant. He was a really good example of this. And I have some sort of visual aids here. This is a dog that came through Muddy Paws rescue, had some behavior problems, and I just wanted to point out the sort of body language elements here. It might look like a happy smiling dog, but to me I see hyperarousal. I see a really tense body. You see how muscular and tense that body is? That dog is tensing constantly. Its face is in a big smile, like a Joker-like grimace, with these wide eyes and tense ears. This to me and this sort of spoon-like tongue. You see how the tongue is curved upwards rather than lolling down to the side or lolloping. This to me looks like stress over excitement. And I want to show you another version. This here again, another kind of good picture of hyperarousal. We're seeing a lot of facial tension, these extreme ridges in their faces, this big smile that looks like a smile. And I see all the time, look, she's smiling. In fact, that dog is pretty stressed. That's the facial grimace. It's the muscles pulled back in the face. And we're seeing that same spoon-like tongue, wide eyes, tense body, and pricked up ears. And I want people to be really good at differentiating the difference between excitement and hyperarousal, particularly within a foster group or a group of fosters or rescue workers, because it's such a fine line. The difficulty we have in reading dogs' body language is often to do with breed as well. You know, if you have a fluffy breed, a hypoallergenic breed, it's going to be much harder to see these kinds of facial expressions. So being really vigilant of watching the dog really carefully. Is their tongue relaxed? Is their tongue tense? These are really useful things to watch. And you can also think, another thing about both of these sort of pictures here is we have this hyperward-leaning stance, very like sort of muscular and like kind of over-muscled almost bodies. And I see this a lot with dogs that are in hyper-aroused states because they just cannot settle down. So they become almost really tense and muscular. The second I guess, big sort of area of behavior that we see, or thing that we see as a result of this stress and dogs coming into the city, is shut down behavior. So it's kind of on the other end of the spectrum. On one end, we have this hyper excitement, hyperactivity, and we see this a lot in foster dogs and recent adoptees. But on the other end of the spectrum, we see what we call shut down behavior. This is often called, what is it, submissive something. I have it written there, I can't see because there's a pop-up on my screen. But it's often called that by some other sort of behavior practitioners and training practitioners. And I have a video here that I kind of wanted to show you. Let's see if it works. I think we can, here you go. So this little video here is a really good example of shutdown behavior. What shutdown behavior basically means is a dog that's experienced chronic, almost unmanageable stress for extended periods of time can suppress behaviors. So often when we have dogs coming out of the shelter system, we have people saying, they're perfect, they're doing so well, they're so well behaved. And then it's not until a few weeks or months in that they start to exhibit the kind of unwanted behaviors or sort of problematic behaviors. And this is a really great video example here of a dog shutting down after a stressful event. And I wanted to show you this one because it shows a kind of minor version of what these dogs often go through. So when we have a dog that comes into the home, it's not playing, it's not really eating, it's very slow moving, it's mostly sleeping. We tend to say this dog is not calm, this dog is probably shut down or suppressed. And I wanted to show you this little video here. I'm going to turn the sound off and just narrate for you. So this little dog had just got snapped in the face by another dog. It's very upset because of this. And I wanted to show you some things, some pointers here of this dog. So we're seeing rapid blinking, ducked head. Its ears are kind of floppy and low. You see a nervous short mouth, slightly short mouth, turning her head away repeatedly from the dog that's next to her. And we see this kind of ducked down head that we see a lot in shut down dogs. And it looks a lot like just calm behavior, right? This looks like calm behavior for lots of people, but it actually is in fact a dog that's really quite upset to the point that it's kind of suppressing its behavior. And I think a few minutes later, the dog jumps down onto the floor. I know that's in a second, but she still hasn't moved. So we see lots of cessation of movement, and you see that kind of nervous glance over at the dog that upset her. And I just think this is such an interesting video because it really does show that this looks like perfectly normal behavior, but to an expert, to me, this looks like a very distressed dog, almost like a person that might just be shaking and rocking in the corner. And we see a few minutes later, the dog sitting hunched over, looking away from the animal that's stressing her out. The person who made this video, I'll give you guys the link if you're interested in this and reading the article. She's a wonderful trainer. She's mentioning that she should have got her dog out of that situation, but she didn't know any better in the moment. The dog's not responding when they're saying her name. She's not coming to jump on the couch. So here we're seeing a suppression of behaviors. Really, really interesting behavioral phenomenon. And what we see with this in our rescue dogs is this on a larger scale. What this means is, one second, I'm just going to double check.
Yeah, will you check the wait room?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see that. Let me double check now. Ah, there's Amanda. There she is, no worries. Sorry, I wasn't checking my phone. Hi, Amanda, welcome. Let me just share my screen again and keep going. For Amanda, we're just chatting about suppressed behaviors and how prolonged chronic stress can cause dogs to shut down a little, but we just watched a little video about that. So the little video that we just watched was a dog shutting down after 1 mile, like what was to that dog in a very stressful incident, but it was just one. What we tend to see with dogs that come out of kind of maybe like slightly more stressful situations is that those experiences stack and stack and stack over years for some of our dogs. But even if they're still young, it's happening during very formative times. So we end up seeing an overall suppression of behaviors in the short term while the dog figures out, am I safe? Is it safe to perform these behaviors? And then we tend to see more problematic behaviors occurring sort of between 3 weeks and 3 months down the line. So I think the big thing that I wanted to talk about with fosters and new adoptees is to be aware of this, because dogs may seem totally fine to an untrained eye. They may seem like they're just calm, they're really calm. Oh, but she does need to urinate a lot. She's really calm. Oh, but she's really itchy, are things that I hear a lot of. And these sorts of frequent urinations, itchiness, scratching, sneezing, yawning, these are actually often signs of stress that go unnoticed. Yeah, in short, shutdown behavior is just an animal that's too scared and uncertain to display all the emotions that they're experiencing. However, if we watch their body language very carefully, like we saw in that video and also in the hyperarousal PDF, we can see the signs of this stress occurring, and we can kind of be like detectives, watching their body language and trying to see, are you stressed? What's going on? How do you feel? But these dogs are often very difficult to manage for different reasons. If you have a hyper-aroused dog, a dog that's very overexcited, finding it difficult to self-regulate, we have a lot of kind of safety issues, I guess, in the sense that they tend to be very rambunctious, kind of difficult to manage. If you have a dog that's shut down at the beginning, we tend to want to be trying to make them as comfortable as possible, because chances are if we don't make them comfortable during this initial stage, we'll see more problems down the line. So issues that often come up later as a result of shutdown behavior are reactivity that occurs 2 to 3 weeks after they enter the home, or even longer in some cases. So we're going to talk about how we're going to be managing these animals. So yeah, how do we care for these dogs, right? They're not coming from an easy situation, and are oftentimes as fosters and adopters or rescue staff, we're the first port of call. We're kind of their I guess, behavioral first responders. You know, we're here to kind of help them get through this really difficult transition. And again, on top of all of this, what do we have? New York City, which is just great. Yay, it's so much fun for us. It makes our lives really hard. And I think that that's kind of why I wanted to reach out to you guys and offer this support, because you guys are unsung, you know, this is really difficult stuff. It's not easy. I'm a professional. I've been doing this for many years, and it's really, really hard for me. So I can imagine that as someone who doesn't spend 12 hours a day reading and watching stuff about dogs, it's even harder. I wanted to share with you guys all the things that I've learned over the last 4 years about how to manage these dogs so that you can give them the best experiences. So let's talk number one, management. This is so important. And I know Muddy Paws actually has amazing recommendations in regards to management, in the sense that they recommend all dogs are sleeping in crates. They recommend, you know, not doing on-leash greetings and stuff like that. But I wanted to go into it a little bit more deeply, because we can be doing more. Number one, crates. Crates are huge. We obviously already have that as a stipulation for the fosters of Muddy Paws, but for any adopter, I recommend, if possible, as long as there are no severe separation related issues, we have crates set up from day one. This should be in place for months after you adopt a dog, if possible, so that we're giving them a safe place. You can make the crate really comfy. This little papillon looks a bit sad, but we can make a really much comfier crate than that. We can put a bed in it. I would recommend covering most of the sides of the crate, and maybe even putting a little white noise machine on top of the crate. This can be your dog's safe space. It's important that we never touch dogs in the crate. We never drag dogs out of the crate or push them into the crate. Both of those things are going to really ruin that place as a safe space. And we will be talking in the second part of this series all about crate training and confinement training. So you can join us for the next episode or section of this to learn more about that. But for now, I just want to talk about the management strategy. So all meals are fed in the crate. They sleep in the crate. We practice crate counting conditioning, which we'll go into in the next session. But what this is doing is it's ensuring that the crate is a good place where they get really good food, and the crate can go in your bedroom with you if they want to be in the same room as you. But that's where they can sleep at night. This is making sure that they're not doing a whole bunch of terrible things. If they're in the crate at night, they're not peeing everywhere. They're not destroying everything. They're not you're not going to wake up to a kind of a horrible mess in the living room, and we're making sure that they're staying safe. It's also forcing dogs that have hyperactive tendencies to rest, right? So if your dog is a hyperactive breed, like Kobe asleep on the floor here was when he was with me in foster, right now, as you can see, he's not particularly hyperactive, which is very good. It can force dogs to properly get actual rest, because it's so important for many of them. They never even get a full night's rest. The second thing that's very important is gates and pens. So like it says here, a recent rescue or foster should never be loose in the house. Even with constant supervision, to be perfectly honest, they're much faster than us. We can't catch them fast enough. And you know, it can become a game to many dogs to kind of run away and hide, or run away and pee. And again, for those hyperactive dogs, we're getting them practicing sort of often pacing, overly playing for many hours without rest. And for the shutdown dogs, we sometimes can see them getting protective over areas because they're getting worried as people approach them, and you think they're just calmly sitting on the couch, but it can actually be a problem for them. So giving them these barriers, you are living in the gated areas of the house, really confining them a little bit so they don't have free roam at the beginning can be really important. We can use this in multiple settings. We can have a kind of puppy pen set up like this with this Frenchie. We can also use a gate to just block off certain doorways. So they should not have access to the kitchen, particularly if you're cooking or preparing food, because they will learn to counter surf, right? And they should avoid access to forbidden items. So if you have a library, for example, or I don't know, a room full of a larder full of food, make sure that the dogs are not allowed access to this. And remember, we're just talking right now about foster dogs and dogs in the early stages after being adopted. End goal, your dog doesn't have to have this much management all the time. But when we're talking about the first few months, either in foster or in a new home, we really do need to pull out all the stops because we want to make sure they're not practicing bad behavior. And like I said before, with shutdown dogs, we don't know their full repertoire of behaviors yet. It might be 3 months down the line where your dog starts to, you know, destroy the couch. And you don't want to know that when you find your couch destroyed. So it's better to just limit their access at the beginning. And another really important use of gates and pens is to separate animals in a multi-animal household. So this might be dogs and cats, or dogs and dogs, or dogs and mice or rats. I don't care what the other animal is. For the first few days, they should be separated. The first few days, at least, they should be separated while they're getting to terms with their environment. And you can use gates to kind of set that up for them. Tethers. Tethers are a really underutilized method of managing a dog. This is particularly useful if you have a foster dog or a dog that is averse to barriers. And we see lots of dogs that are averse to barriers. They really don't like that physical chain or bars in front of them, in between them and what they want to, the thing they want to get to. That can become very triggering, I guess, for many dogs, is a human way of putting it. So being able to tether your dog to a heavy piece of furniture, particularly hyperactive dogs. If you have a dog that has hyperarousal, is pacing and not settling, really struggling to relax, overly playful, demanding attention, tethers are really a good way to go. It can help them relax. Kobe, little dog down there, would pace and whine and pace and whine and pace and whine and pace and whine for hours. He would just go on, it wouldn't stop. When I put him on a tether, I'd give him a chew on the tether and it helped him settle down. It helped him learn to relax. For lots of young dogs, the tethers will just become a point of chewing. So this is why I like to introduce chain link tethers, or this virtually leash, which is, I think it's about $20 to $30 online. It's pretty much indestructible as far as I can tell. It's pretty excellent if you're a sort of multiple times fosterer, or you regularly have fosters in your home, or if you recently adopted a dog. I highly recommend investing in one of these, as it is a form of controlling and helping to manage your dog in the environment without without having them practice chewing on stuff. So we can tether dogs to heavy pieces of furniture, or if you're like have bigger dogs, for example, or you own your own house, you can just install an eye hook in the wall and just tether the dogs to that. Particularly useful in a multi-dog household if you have multiple animals. Also particularly useful if your dog is barking at sounds at the doorway, for example, so you can keep them away from that space. So then I'm going to go into like different examples of like particular case studies in a second, but I just want to give you guys an overview first. So this is the last one, is drag leashes in terms of management. Now, I don't understand how people have dogs without dragging leashes behind them. They're fast, they're really fast. If they're little squirrels, they'll get away from you, and they'll be doing 1,000,001 things before you even have a chance to stop them. So if you have a chain link leash or a virtually leash, you can drag this behind them. If your dog doesn't chew the leash, you can also just drag your regular leash behind them, kind of on the floor behind them as they're running around the apartment. I would prefer it to be attached to a harness rather than a collar, just so that if you have to implement it and use it, you don't choke them and feel mean about that. And it also means that you can step on that leash, and that can actually be quite a sharp jerk, but you can do that on a harness without worrying about hurting them. So dragging a leash behind particularly a young dog is super, super helpful. We'll talk more about specific applications. Now, I get a lot of pushback about management. I probably get more pushback about management than anything else. And I think it's because we have this image of dogs being able to coexist with us happily, free, and we should be able to just cuddle with them in the bed, and then, you know, they shouldn't pee everywhere and chew our stuff. But it's important to remember and go back to kind of the experience that these dogs have had over the last months or years of their lives, where they probably haven't ever been taught the rules. In fact, they've probably been taught many of the lessons incorrectly. I've met many dogs that were trained to jump up by accident, trained to chew by accident, because they just were not trained very well. They were trained by people who didn't really understand what they were doing. So it can be, we really sometimes can be working against the tide here ever so slightly. And this is why I get sorry, I don't know why this is cut off, but it says, the question is, why can't I just punish the dog when they do something wrong? Or why can't I just say, hey, no, stop that? And why do I have to put all this management in place? Why can't I just say no when they do the wrong thing? Or maybe some other people, you've heard of methods involving maybe using a little bit more force. Some people will use like spray bottles or, you know, collars or leash corrections, etc., etc. Why can't we do that to the animal? There are lots of different reasons why. I have a pretty intense PDF on this. If anyone wants it, just reach out to me, I can send it to you. But I'm just going to go over the high level reasons here. In general, if we start to add aggression into the mix, what we're likely to do is create an aggressive response in return. This is probably the case for most mammals, but very much so the case for dogs. There are multiple studies that go into this, and I can show anybody who's interested. So that's the first method, is that if we start to go in, ooh, careful you, if we start to go in heavy-handed, particularly with shutdown and hyperactive dogs, we might end up creating a worse problem by making them feel threatened, and they might escalate their behavior. Second reason is that most of the misbehavior that we see is a result of the stress, fear and anxiety, right? The destructive behavior, the jumping, the kind of overexcitedness. We've seen that as a result of chronic stress. It's called hyperarousal. It's a clinical term. If we're punishing dogs for the sort of symptoms of their stress, we're probably going to be creating a cyclical stress, a cycle of stress, right? The more we punish, the more stressed they are, the more it comes out. And like we've seen, extremely stressful situations like punishments can lead to suppression of behaviors, which then come out even later on down the line in an even worse way. Obviously, it degrades the human-canine bond. And these are the last two points are the points that I think are most relevant realistically, in terms of ethics and in terms of usefulness of punishment. In this case, most of the time when we try to punish dogs, we actually reinforce the behavior. So for example, I'm thinking hyperactive dogs that are jumping up and we're going, stop that, Fluffy, Fluffy, stop it. Fluffy just got a bunch of attention and really a lot of fun being pushed away. Fluffy is probably gonna come back again for another round of that really fun game called I Jump Up and Then Get Pushed Down. Another really obvious example of this is the dog barks, buff, 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 pay attention to me. And then we go, stop that, Fluffy. Fluffy, we don't like it when you do that. And Fluffy goes, they looked at me, yeah. So really we're accidentally, or more often than not, reinforcing the behavior when we're trying to punish the behavior. And if we escalated our punishment to something more severe, well, then we have all of these other issues to deal with. So that's like the main reason that I don't really punish is it's not effective most of the time. From an ethical standpoint, as you guys know, my love is animal ethics. That's why I've done a lot of the graduate degree in that subject. But for me, it's more of a question of, is this the right time to be training? And I think this is particularly useful for fosters. If there are any fosters here or any fosters watching the recording of this, I think a big thing that I like to tell fosters is it's not your job to fix the behavior problem or to train the dog. That will be the job of the adopter. If you are the adopter, I think it's your job to start training the dog, but maybe in a few weeks, when they come in the home, it's maybe not the best time to start teaching them, to start telling them that they're doing things wrong. Maybe we want to just let them settle for a few weeks and then start training in a week or two, so that once we kind of know a little bit more about them. And implementing management strategies at the beginning is a way that we can give them time to decompress without constantly telling them that they're doing things wrong, because that's what they'll do if they're given the freedom. They'll do a million things wrong because they don't know. So if we have the management in place preemptively, we can be avoiding having to follow them around saying, don't do that, stop doing that, we don't like this, bad dog. Instead, we're just setting them up to succeed. And that's why I called this kind of section of the course, Setting Up to Succeed. So we talked a little bit about management, crates, gates, tethers, drag leashes, how we can use them to minimize our dog's ability to perform unwanted behaviors. But schedules and boundaries are also a really underutilized way to help dogs feel less stressed. Now, this is applicable to every dog, not necessarily just fosters and recently adopted dogs. Specifically, if your dog has behavior problems that you're trying to address, these can be useful things to be implementing. So let's talk a little bit about schedules and boundaries. Oh no, why is this happening? Sorry, my slide is a little bit silly, but it's fine. I pretty much know what we're talking about. So the left-hand column is meant to say, actually, let's just do this for a second. There you go. Look, fixed it. 1 second. All right, we're just going to look at it like this for a second because my thing is being a bit funny. Okay, so let's look at schedules. We're looking at regular sleeping and waking times. This is hard given lockdown, right? But it really helps dogs to have a regular time when they're sleeping and a regular time when they're getting up in the morning. Keeping that as sort of regular as possible will decrease stress overall. I like to schedule a dog, a foster dog, or a recent adoptee. I schedule their days and it's the same every day, if I can. That will make their anxiety a little bit less, you know, they don't know what's going on. And any normalcy, any sense of predictability will help their overall stress levels. So I do it this way. I have AM enrichment slots and PM enrichment slots, meaning an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening, maybe a little bit less for some dogs, in which I'm training and playing with them. You can scatter that throughout the day if you want a little bit more time to just interact with the dog. But I really like to make it as consistent as possible. Sometimes I'll ask people, how often do you play with your dog? And they don't know. Or what times does your dog go out for a walk? And they don't have an answer. Well, that probably stresses the dog out a little bit, you know, not knowing what's going to happen, if their needs are going to be met. And remember that these dogs are coming from situations where their needs are chronically neglected. So they need to know what's going to happen next. They need some sense of stability. So regular sleeping and waking times, regular enrichment schedules. We'll talk more about that in a second. Lots and lots of solo projects. So activities that they can do by themselves without us. And we'll talk more about that in a second, but I'm holding up a little bully stick here as an example. But things that they can be doing that are not related to us. And I'll talk more about that in a second. And this is important. Most of these dogs really benefit from an enforced nap in the middle of the day. At least one, particularly if you're seeing a hyper-aroused dog or a dog that's struggling to settle. And actually, no, even if you're seeing a shutdown dog, because that dog needs time to decompress away from the family. It seems like it's kind of not the case, but lots of dogs in chronic stress states, they need high quality sleep to decompress. And what I tend to see with dogs that aren't given the midday nap is they're sleeping throughout the day, but they're constantly being startled into being awake by, where are you going? Are you moving somewhere? What's happening? And they're not getting proper high quality sleep where they're actually in a full REM, like really, really deep sleep, because their nervous systems are on high alert, right? So we can help them out in this way. We can help them out by giving them a midday nap, either in a bedroom or in the crate with blankets and a white noise machine on top so that they can really, really relax. And it's a real game changer for some. So schedules can be huge in helping dogs feel better. And the second one here is boundaries. And this is the one where we have the hardest it's kind of hardest to implement from a human on the human side. The dogs usually are pretty good at accepting these boundaries, but it's really hard for humans to get on board with this because we really want our dogs to be part of our life, particularly a new adoptee or a foster dog who we're getting to know. We want to give them the best, right? This is the best. These boundaries are the best for them. And I really, really highly recommend to every foster, particularly fosters, or even recent adoptees who you don't know the dog yet, you know, to give them a little bit of time where you're shielding them from having too much freedom. So the boundaries that for animals and humans that I usually recommend are the dogs should not be allowed on the couch, on the sofas. The dogs should not be allowed to sleep in the bed. They should be confined, meaning either a tether, a gate, or a crate during meal times, meaning human meal times. When humans are eating, the dogs should be confined to some degree because we see a lot of resource guarding and demanding behaviors occurring around meal times. So being preemptive, don't wait for them to be demanding. Preemptively, they're away during those times. so that they're not being they're not having this dangled in front of them. I'm just going to do this again so that we can see the rest of it like this. When they're eating, they should be confined, either in a crate or behind a gate, or even just on a tether. I'm not draconian. I don't want them to always be in the cage. I just want to make sure that we're not setting them up to fail by putting them with a delicious bowl of the nicest dog food they've ever tasted in the middle of the living room, and then provoking them to guard that from the human being who walks into the bathroom by them, you know? So giving them a little bit of space while they're eating and confining them to some degree can really help. Never approach a sleeping or eating dog. Just don't do it. Let sleeping dogs lie is a kind of idiom for a reason. It's very, very wise. We don't know whether our dogs that are coming from a rescue system, dogs that are going into foster or recent adoptees, we don't know whether they have the propensity to guard yet, realistically. Because remember, those behaviors could be suppressed. And I often see people bringing dogs into their home and they're saying, it's fine, the dog's totally fine. And then 2 or 3 weeks in, we start to see these problems emerging. We have to set up appropriate management from the get-go. Our job is to prevent the dog from practicing these very normal canine behaviors, particularly the resource guarding one, right? Like, I think there is so much resource guarding in dogs that come through rescue communities. And I just think it's so, like, the whole pandemic has so beautifully demonstrated the resource guarding, how resource guarding is not their fault. Who hoarded toilet roll? I did. At the beginning of all of this, I went out and bought a bunch of toilet roll like lots of other people did. That's resource guarding, because we were stressed. There were environmental stresses on us as human beings, so we guarded resources. And that's what the dogs want to do as well. It's very natural for mammals to do this. So we really want to be making sure that we're setting them up for success. And I say here again, there should be no exceptions to these rules. After a few months of successful cohabitation, then I usually recommend relaxing the management. Because then you can avoid a problem even starting. So boundaries and schedules are two kind of very difficult to implement on a human level, but so beneficial for the dog. And I always try to get guardians to be as kind to their dogs as possible in kind of doing this kind of sometimes uncomfortable and annoying thing of implementing these things for them right from the get-go. So, okay, so we talked a little bit about management, how we can be setting the dogs up with literal physical management. We talked a little bit about how we can be setting them up to succeed with schedules and boundaries, and creating an environment that doesn't allow them to kind of go crazy and go willy-nilly. The third thing is therapeutic enrichment. So getting the dog's energy out in the right way. Now, let's look at the two kind of types of dogs that we talked about. We've talked about dogs that are a little bit hyperactive, so lack inhibition, and then we've talked about the dogs that are shut down and have suppressed behaviors. And of course, there are lots of other ways that animals cope with stress. These are just two trends that I see, so I'm kind of focusing on them in this session. But with both of these dogs, we want to be fostering very different kind of habits in them. For dogs that are hyper aroused, dogs that struggle to settle, we're looking to calm them down, slow them down, and we're looking to channel their energy into appropriate sort of avenues. So we want them to be doing a little bit less jumping and nipping and a little bit more laying down and licking, and we'll talk about that in a second. But with the shutdown dogs, we want to be encouraging them to come out of their shell. We want to be encouraging them to do things that feel good. And these are some, I mean, this is a really small cross-section of things that we can be doing, but these are probably the things that I find the most useful in terms of enrichment with dogs. And I'm going to do a little demonstration of play as well in a second with Kobe at the end of the class. I just want to go into this kind of stuff first. So when I talked about 2 solo, was it 3 to 4 solo projects a day? This is what I'm talking about. We can be using their food. We can be making them work for their food. So there are some edible chews like bully sticks, raw bones, stuff like that we can be giving to dogs to encourage chewing. Chewing relieves jaw tension. And lots of our dogs, we're seeing this facial tension in them. It's kind of like when I'm stressed, I want like a glass of wine and I want to watch a Netflix series. This is the dog version of a glass of wine and a Netflix series. They need to check out and just do this very normal doggy behavior, repetitive chewing, licking, and sniffing. These are very therapeutic to dogs. So I will get them chewing on raw bones and bully sticks. I will freeze item like cream cheese, pumpkins, sweet potatoes into kongs, lickable mats, and frozen into ice cube trays if you don't have any of the above items. And then you can kind of give them the frozen food to chew on and lick, and then sniffing games. So kind of getting dogs snuffling around the floor. Sniffari is just what I call when we hide treats around the house and then we help the dogs sniff them out. Or you can even just hide a treat in some towels like this and just give it to the dog to sniff around in. And I'm going to show you guys a little video of a homemade snuffle box that I made. There you go. I'm going to show you guys a video of a homemade snuffle box that I made with Kobe when he was first with me with a board and train. So is that not going to work? Okay, we'll do it this way then. It's going to give our dogs an appropriate place to channel their energy. For shut down dogs, this kind of stuff is going to help bring them out of their shell. For dogs that are a little bit more hyperactive, it's going to give them an appropriate release, an appropriate place to kind of channel all of the stress that they're feeling. It can be incredibly therapeutic for dogs to solve problems. And on top of all of that, this is solo activity. So the dogs can do it while we're in the shower, while we're cooking. We don't have to be tethered to them, always helping them every second of the way. And it can be an incredibly good way to help animals just kind of learn to regulate themselves and learn to kind of fix their own stress, right? By basically calming and self-soothing. So that was just one example of a kind of homemade version that you can make. There are tons more. If anyone's interested, check out our IG page. We have loads more examples and ideas of stuff like that in our IGTV. And if anyone has any more interest in learning more about this stuff, please just DM us and we can send you our indoor enrichment PDF, which is a free PDF we have, basically outlining our favorite ways to utilize indoor therapeutic enrichment. One important thing about this kind of enrichment, it's low arousal enrichment. You see how we're not getting them running, we're not getting them jumping, we're actually encouraging calm behaviors, we're encouraging self-soothing behaviors. And I think we get stuck sometimes playing fetch and tug with our dogs. And we might spend half an hour playing fetch and tug. I would rather you spend half an hour loading up that snuffle mat over and over again with tiny treats for your dog to sniff out for a full half an hour rather than playing fetch with them. And it seems like it's not going to wear them out, but I promise you it will. It seems like it won't, but low arousal activity, it engages the brain, can be just as if not more exhausting for many dogs than high arousal activity. So just being mindful of that. The more of this you can give them, the better. When I had Kobe, I think I probably spent, cool, I got a great question here. I'm gonna address that in a second. Thank you, Alex. So yeah, give them lots and lots of this kind of stuff, really help them self-soothe, help them calm themselves down, a little bit more of that, a little bit less excitable play and stuff like that. We're going to talk about play in a second though, don't worry. So we're going to talk about therapeutic play now. It looks like it's from the slide. So lots of people struggle with a few things with new foster dogs: jumping, mouthing, barking, and guarding toys. These are really big when playing. So I have a few tips to moderate play. I have a video called Structured Play, Moderating Impulse Control Through Games. It's on our YouTube and our Instagram, so you can check that out. It's a free video, it's a free tutorial that takes you through my favorite way to play with dogs that struggle with impulse control. So that's completely free for you guys and for everyone. Please check it out if you want more information. I just have a few quick tips before I do some case studies and then some questions, which are to use a large toy, obviously the biggest toy you can find, switch between playing and foraging, meaning play for 10 seconds, and then maybe give them a snuffle mat for a minute. Play for 10 seconds, give them a snuffle mat. Some dogs can only play for 10 seconds before they start getting overexcited and nippy and jumpy. If your dog can go for a minute, 5 minutes, that's great, but practice switching in and out of play mode. Playing, then we're chewing, then we're playing, then we're snuffling. So they're not just constantly getting more and more and more and more excited over the course of the game. The large toys so they don't catch your skin by accident, in case that wasn't clear. Take regular breaks to relax and cool down. Keep sessions short. And if you have a big dog, a rambunctious dog, put a leash on them beforehand and tether them preemptively to something. We call this a back tie. You could tether them to the couch if you live in a small apartment. If you're lucky enough to have a yard, tether them to a post or a tree. That way, if they try to jump on you to get you to play, you can move away from them and step outside of their perimeter. I'll talk more about that in a second. So that was that video. This is how I want to talk about some common questions that we have. These are questions that were sent in by Muddy Paws fosters, and these are the questions that we see the most often coming up. So I wanted to take what we've talked about today and apply it to these different questions. So I might actually just, no, I'm going to keep the share like this. Okay, so I'm going to talk about these individually. If anybody does have any questions, there'll be space for questions in about 5 minutes. So I do want to take, if you want to put questions in the chat now, you can totally put questions in the chat as well. Up to you guys. I'm going to address all questions in a second. All right, so commonly asked question number 1, how do I handle jumpiness and mouthiness? So let's talk about the things that we chatted about. Management, how can we use management to fix that? We can be keeping a leash on the dog at all times. Maybe that means that someone is literally holding that leash all the time and are walking the dog around the house on the leash, so that when they try to jump, we can physically move them away from us. Maybe that dog is constantly tethered or constantly in a pen until it learns how to behave that's a little bit more appropriate. My main point about this is that behaviors like jumping and mouthing, actually a lot of these behaviors are self-reinforcing. What that means is that if a dog is allowed to practice jumping, if the dog is allowed to practice mouthing, it's basically got a little dollar has gone in that bank account because it felt good. It's a natural behavior for dogs, kind of like how scratching an itch feels good. It's the same kind of self-reinforcing reinforcement loop. So our main job is going to be to remove the opportunity to practice this behavior. Like we talked about before, punishing the behavior after it's occurred is probably just going to reinforce it, right? And to be perfectly honest, I've rarely seen any human being effectively punish jumping or mouthiness, because it almost always, the dog just goes back to doing it again. So I definitely recommend keeping a leash on that dog if they're jumping or moving them away. Usually mouthiness occurs and jumping like this occurs in a few contexts: when they're doing greetings with people, in which case we always have a leash on that dog, or when playing, right? So in which case we can implement that structured play where we have the dog tethered to something preemptively, so we can step away from them if they get too excited. You see how a lot of the strategies that I have in this first section are all about preemptive action rather than sort of responding to the animal's behavior. We know what the animal's going to do. They're going to jump, they're going to mouth, they're going to pee, they're going to steal stuff. It's a dog. So we have to be preemptive. We say, I know you're going to try and jump because you're an 8-month-old untrained pity mix from the south who's just come up and you have no idea how to live in this world. So we're going to have to be realistic in our expectations of them and say, I know you're going to do this, so I'm going to put a leash on you and I'm going to make sure that you can't practice it, because I don't want you to, I always say, I don't want you to smoke that cigarette, because it's like that. If we're trying to get them to get rid of a behavior, we think about it like quitting smoking. So putting a leash on the dog, back tying when you're playing with it so that you can step out of their perimeter if they get a little bit too excited, as well as just putting in place all of the kind of calming strategies that I mentioned before when playing with the dog. So regular breaks, lots of snuffling in between play sessions, etc., etc. Another sort of outlet way that you can help jumpiness and mouthiness is going to be with the boundaries and the structure. Jumpiness and mouthiness in general, signs of stress, signs of overexcitedness. If we can give them structure and boundaries, we're going to be creating a dog that thinks a little bit more before they act. So the boundaries, like not being out on the couch, that kind of stuff, it's important that we maintain the boundaries and the structure with that kind of dog so that they learn what's expected of them, and we're very consistent in that. And then the last thing about this therapeutic enrichment, giving them tons and tons and tons of good exercise, not too much exercise and lots of low arousal enrichment. So really letting them get their kind of energy out in appropriate ways would be really important. So that's how I'd apply those three things to that question. Destructive and stealing items like shoes. What do I do? I get this so many times. Realistically, when we're talking about recent adoptees and fosters, they shouldn't have access to those things. They don't have the capacity to handle that just yet. So our job as their behavioral first responders is to not let them practice that, not give them the opportunity to rehearse that behavior that can be quite dangerous, because once they've taken the item, they could eat it, that's bad, but also you have to get it back, right? And then you have to play the chase game, which is really reinforcing for them. So if your dog does steal something by accident, usually what I'll do is I'll just ignore them, walk into the kitchen, get out a treat bag, go, oh my goodness, what is this? And look who just left their bully stick to come and say hello, Mr. Kobe. So usually just getting another item is enough to get them to relinquish the item. But realistically, our main training plan here is going to be avoid letting them have it in the first place. Implement that proper management so that they are not having the sort of option to do that. And then you guys, when the dog is adopted or later on, once the dog's settled down, you can take a basic manners class. You can teach the dog to leave it. But that's just not really the scope of this particular session. We're really talking about how to handle the adjustment period where we actually don't want to do too much training, right? So I have, this one is probably the hardest one, I think. The dog is displaying, actually the last two are definitely the hardest ones. The dog is displaying unwanted attention-seeking behaviors, barking, nipping, etc. Most of this will come down to ignoring. I'm not sorry to say, like if a dog is nipping, it's going to be in a pen or tethered or in a crate. We're going to manage the behavior so they're not allowed to practice it. Barking is slightly harder because the dog can bark at you even if they're on a tether or in a crate. So my options usually for this are, number one, give the dog plenty of appropriate outlets for that behavior. So lots and lots of play and enrichment. And then additionally making sure that if they're barking at you, you're not rewarding it. Do not look at them, do not go towards them, and maybe even just get up and leave the room. Those are usually my go-to there in that respect. It can be difficult though. I know that one's hard to handle. If anyone has any specific issues in regards to that, they can reach out to me, but it is a harder one. And then the last one, my dog won't settle down and be hyperactive. They won't sleep. Most of these dogs will only sleep if tethered or crated. So in which case we're going to be implementing a schedule or a routine that's going to make sure that they get enough rest. We're going to be giving them plenty of good low arousal enrichment. And another sort of exercise that you can be practicing with them is relaxation training, which is outside the scope of this session. But there's lots and lots of resources and we have a blog article about it. If anyone's interested, they can DM me and I can send you that information. But the general idea is these dogs that are hyperactive and can't settle, they don't have any other option in their physical body but to be kind of hyperactive like that. So realistically, there's nothing we can do other than just try and continue to foster an environment which is low stress and hope that over time, we know that over time they will be able to settle down more, but it really is just going to be a management strategy until we get them feeling a little bit better. Okay, so those are some common questions that we see in regards to those these particular topics. I do want to check the chat for questions here and answer any specific ones that you have. So let me just have a quick look here. Okay, 1 second. All right. What if the dog is really resisting eating in the crate? Just leave it for them to go to it? Really good question. So if the dog is really resisting eating in the crate, they might have some additional stresses being put in place just because of the maybe they've had some bad experiences with the crate before, you never really know. So in the next section, which is going to be hopefully next week, we're going to talk all about separation and isolation. So if you're struggling with dogs in regards to crating, definitely tune in for that one because we're going to be doing more training in that one and talking a little bit more about how to crate train dogs. It's a big topic, so I'm giving it its own section. So anyone interested in that can come to the next class and we'll talk more about that. With the note about all eating being done in the crate, does this include snuffle mats, foraging boxes for meals? Good question. It doesn't have to be in the crate, but it has to be with a confinement of some sort. So if they're doing snuffling boxes or foraging boxes, they should be either in a pen or tethered or crated. The reason being is that if they're loose in the house, chances are of them resource guarding much, much higher, chances of us respecting their space much lower. So they're either on a tether where we respect the perimeter of that tether, or they're in a pen where there's a physical boundary that will stop them from feeling threatened by us approaching them and trying to take stuff off them. So some sort of, ooh, this dog just farted. That was a big fart. Ew, sorry. We've all been there, I know we've all been there. Really stinky, holy Christ. Whew. This is a small room as well. Thank you, Kobe. All right, so some form of confinement would be great. We often find that fosters mistake jumpy, mouthy behaviors for aggression. Yeah, that's often the case. Do you have any advice to share to help distinguish between these two so that our fosters feel more comfortable with the dog in their home? Really, really good question. So mouthing and jumping looks really scary, but it is actually a very normal dog behavior. When we see dogs that are coming in hyperactive, hyper-aroused states, they lack inhibition even more. So we're basically seeing kind of like a kid that's struggling to turn off the Xbox and starting to lay down. It can look very aggressive at times. I do understand why it can be scary, particularly with a larger dog. Usually the difference that I make is that mouthy jumping behaviors tend to be a little bit more playful, slightly more bouncy body language. If the dog is being aggressive, you tend to see warning signs beforehand, like a freezing, a low growl, staring you in the eye, like a hard stare like this. And usually jumping, mouthing behaviors, the reason that they keep going is because we push them away and they come back because they're like, this is so much fun. So I think a big thing there is if you're seeing the kind of hyper arousal there and that kind of like sort of aggressive behavior, using your management is so important. Don't let them practice it to start off with, because unfortunately, once they've jumped up on you, it's kind of anything you can do to stop that is going to be reinforcing them. So I think that that's a really good point there from Amanda, though it does often look like quite worrying behavior. And you know that we give Muddy Paws support. So if there are any fosters in the system who are worried about their behavior, just shoot a video of it. Because if you have a video, we can take you through the behavior, we can take you through the body language and put your mind at rest. Or we can say, oh no, wait, you're right, that is aggressive. So really videoing these animals is a really great way of us being able to accurately understand what's going on. Okay, so we're talking about generalized anxiousness to all the new stimuli outside in New York City. Some even seem to be really conflicted, where they want to stay outside but are showing lots of stress signals. Really good point there from Mike. We see lots of dogs that want to go outside for walks but are actually really stressed when outside on walks. And usually what I'd say there for people is, well, first of all, we're going to be doing another section of this, which is just about walking outside and just about acclimating the dogs to walks in the city streets. So tune in for that for more information on that. But in general, if you're seeing stress signs outside, really dogs should be kept mostly inside. And this is something that's really, people get really confused about when I say, but most of these dogs, part of the management strategy is not repeatedly putting them in situations that stress them out. For most dogs that come in through the foster system or recent adoptees, I only do necessary potty walks. You need to poop? He's like, I farted and now I need to poop. I know. I'll take you out in a second. So really minimizing walks outside is a great option here. And Nina says here, what if treats hyper aroused, so snuffling games still seem very stressful? That's a really good point. You can use the lowest value food, so their kibble is a good option, or even just like popcorn or something really low value, and giving them plenty of space away from you to work on the snuffling will help soothe them, even though it seems like it might get them more excited, like they're kind of like over time they will settle down, because we're literally practicing breathing, right, which lowers the sympathetic arousal, it calms the sympathetic nervous system. It can't stay stressful forever. You really need to poop? I know, we're almost done. He's like, it's 6 o'clock, Karishma, I need to go. All right, that was an hour. Kobe is telling me that an hour is gone. There were some really great questions here. I'm really happy to take any other questions that people have, but I'm gonna have to finish up today because my alarm clock is telling me that it's time to go for a poop, isn't it? Yes, it is. So I'm really excited to do more of these with you guys. And we've got some really, really great questions here. I'm particularly interested for people interested in separation training and also in urban acclimation. We're going to be doing a section on each of those. So I'll keep promoting this stuff so you guys can sign up for those as well. But we're going to deep dive into those in a bit. So I just wanted to thank everybody for coming to this first session. This one was sort of a foundational session, talking mostly about structures and stuff like that, but it's still very, very important information. So thanks for joining. Thanks for your great questions. We're going to be doing at least 2 or 3 more of these. So I'm going to send out information to all of you guys so you can join us again, hopefully in the coming weeks. So thank you guys so much. I'm going to call off now and let you all go. But you're all amazing. We have a wonderful team with Muddy Paws, and I'm really excited to be part of this wonderful movement towards helping dogs and changing the way that we rescue in urban environments. Y'all are amazing. Okay, thank you so much.
Karishma.
This is yeah, thank you. You guys are all amazing.
Thank you. Love you. Bye.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.